Why is my father's name on a page that says it doesn't exist? The little black girl said, her voice cutting through the glass-walled inheritance room like a blade. The entire chamber froze. Benjamin Whitmore stopped mid-breath, his hand still hovering above the printed will. Around the long mahogany table, lawyers who had been speaking seconds earlier went completely silent, pens suspended above paper. The only sound left was the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint rustle of documents being turned too slowly. Annie Harper stood on her tiptoes, pointing at a single sheet labeled page 7. The page looked ordinary at first glance, perfectly formatted, stamped, and bound with the rest of the will, but the line where a beneficiary's name should have been was visibly disturbed, as if something had been erased and rewritten too carefully to be honest. "That will is fake," she repeated, quieter now but sharper. One of the senior attorneys gave a nervous laugh and stepped forward slightly, adjusting his cufflinks as if to restore order. "Sweetheart, you're mistaken. This document has been verified." But Annie didn't move her finger. She tapped the same blank space again. "Then why is this part warmer than the rest of the page?" she asked. Benjamin finally looked closer, not at her face but at the paper. A faint, uneven texture caught the light where ink should have been consistent, like a name had been physically lifted out. Evelyn Cross, seated near the head of the table, smiled tightly and reached for the file. "This meeting is not appropriate for children," she said, her voice calm but clipped, as she tried to slide the document back into its folder. Annie stepped forward first and placed her small palm directly over page 7 before anyone could take it. Her hand was shaking, but her eyes weren't. "My dad's name was here," she said. The words landed heavier than they should have in a room built for contracts and silence. Benjamin's gaze tightened, not in agreement, but in confusion he didn't expect to feel. 3 hours earlier, the room had been different, controlled, rehearsed, polished. The Whitmore estate's legal wing had smelled faintly of expensive cedar polish and cold paper ink, as if even air was expected to behave professionally. Annie had been sitting in a leather chair too big for her, swinging her feet just slightly above the marble floor, watching the lawyers lay out documents like sacred objects. On the table in front of her, a glass of untouched milk had begun to form a thin skin on top, forgotten in the tension of adults speaking in careful tones. No one noticed that Annie wasn't looking at the signatures. They were looking at each other. The lawyers were looking at Evelyn. Evelyn was looking at Benjamin. And Benjamin, unusually, was looking at the documents like something inside them didn't belong. Annie noticed the smallest things no one else reacted to. A page that stuck slightly when turned, a corner of paper that didn't align perfectly with the binder holes, a timestamp in the margin that didn't match the rest of the filing history. "That page is wrong," she had said earlier, almost absent-mindedly. No one responded at first, not because they didn't hear her, but because adults in that room had learned which voices to treat as background noise. Evelyn had smiled at her without turning fully. "It's just formatting, dear." But Annie had already leaned forward, her eyes narrowing at page 7 specifically, where the ink looked subtly different under the light, too fresh, too clean, like something had been replaced after the fact. Benjamin finally spoke now in the present moment, his voice lower. "Annie, where did you see this?" She hesitated for the first time, then lifted something small from the edge of her pocket. A folded copy of an older document, edges softened from being handled too many times. "Because this one still has it," she said, and as Benjamin took it, unfolding the paper slowly, his eyes landed on a single line that should not have survived the official record at all. Just one name, faint but unmistakable, sitting exactly where page 7 had been emptied. Benjamin Whitmore held the folded old document Annie had placed in front of him, fingers tracing the edges without unfolding it fully, his eyes flicking between the pristine page 7 and the worn copy in her hands. The room felt impossibly quiet, save for the faint hum of the air conditioner and the subtle scrape of a chair where Evelyn Cross shifted slightly, smoothing the corner of the legal binder as if to assert normalcy. Annie stood closer now, tiny against the massive table, but her gaze did not waver. She remembered every minute her mother had warned her about details adults overlooked. "The timestamp doesn't match the filing log," she said softly, pointing to a corner that Benjamin almost missed. The ink lighter, almost imperceptible under the overhead lights. He nodded slightly, not speaking, just committing it to memory, the first flicker of tension in his composed posture. Across the room, a security camera blinked its acknowledgement and then went dark for 2 minutes, unnoticed by the lawyers but noted by Annie. She stepped forward, holding the old copy closer, and whispered, "It should have been submitted on March 5th, not March 7th. The lawyers exchanged polite glances, as if to reassure themselves the child could not grasp the significance. Yet Benjamin's eyes lingered on the discrepancy, his jaw tightening imperceptibly. Outside, the rain pattered against the glass wall, a soft rhythm that contrasted the tautness inside. Annie's hand brushed against the folded document again, feeling the small crease where her mother's pen had left an indentation long ago, proof of someone's prior authorization now erased in the official version. Evelyn offered a smile, hands folded, the gesture almost maternal, yet the slight tremor in her fingers betrayed an unspoken urgency to regain control. Benjamin finally spoke, his voice low, deliberate. "Annie, where did you find this copy?" She held it a little higher, careful not to let the adult take it from her too quickly. "It was with Mom's things. She never let anyone else see it," she said, voice steady, almost commanding. Across the table, a second envelope protruded from the legal folder. A coffee receipt from 2 days prior, inconspicuously printed with a name repeated twice, her father's name crossed out the second time. Benjamin's eyes narrowed, just a hint of recognition, a silent question forming. The lawyers, still upright, nodded politely, but Benjamin sensed the unspoken undercurrent, that not everything presented in this room was as straightforward as it appeared. Annie noticed his glance and leaned slightly toward him, tapping the edge of page 7 as though to punctuate her silent message. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide, erase, and rewrite. Behind the calm decorum, Evelyn's perfume lingered faintly in the air, sweet but too strong, as if to mask the metallic scent of ink and paper manipulation. Benjamin adjusted his cuff, a micro-gesture, but his gaze never left the document, tracing over the erased name and the odd timestamp. Annie exhaled quietly, barely audible, then added, "And there's a second key card that shouldn't exist yet," her words slicing the polished silence. Benjamin froze mid-breath, eyes drifting toward the card still in the folder, the first proof that the world he trusted had quietly shifted beneath him. Even the faint glow of a forgotten desk lamp reflected off the envelope corner, highlighting a folded note barely visible, the first tangible trace that this was no longer just a hunch or child's intuition. It was real and dangerously deliberate. Benjamin's eyes stayed locked on the edge of the folder where the second key card lay half-hidden beneath a stack of legal documents, its metallic surface catching the overhead light in a way that felt too deliberate to be accidental. The room's air conditioning clicked softly, almost too loud in the silence that followed Annie's last words, and Benjamin finally reached forward, not to take the card, but to rotate it slightly with 2 fingers, as if touching it too directly might confirm something he wasn't ready to accept. Evelyn cross-shifted in her seat, smoothing her skirt once, then twice, her smile tightening at the corners as she said, "That's just an old access card, nothing relevant to today's filing." But Annie had already leaned in closer, pointing not at the card this time, but at the timestamp printed faintly along its magnetic strip. "It was used this morning," she said quietly. The lawyers exchanged a glance that lasted less than a second too long. Benjamin noticed. He didn't react outwardly, but his hand paused midair. From the corner of the room, a security monitor blinked back to life for a single second, then displayed a system log showing a 2-minute gap in recorded footage between 10:14 and 10:16 a.m. Annie's gaze lifted immediately. "That's when it went dark," she whispered. No one answered her. Instead, one of the attorneys stepped forward, adjusting his tie as he reached for the monitor remote too quickly, too precisely, and the screen immediately returned to a static legal interface. Benjamin didn't look at him. He was now staring at Evelyn's purse, where a small notification sound had just vibrated, quick, suppressed, but unmistakable. She reached down, muted it, and placed the phone face down on the table with a calmness that didn't match the speed of her movement. Annie noticed first. "It rang twice already," she said. Not accusing, just observing. Evelyn smiled gently, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Sweetheart, you're imagining patterns where there are none." Annie didn't respond. Instead, she turned slightly and pointed toward the sealed envelope beneath the documents. "That one wasn't here earlier," she said. Benjamin's eyes followed her finger. The envelope had no label, but the seal was fresh, too smooth, too recently pressed. He reached for it slowly, breaking the seal without asking permission from anyone in the room, and inside was a printed bank transfer record dated only 48 hours earlier. The transaction referenced a legal restructuring fee tied directly to page 7 revisions. Evelyn's posture changed instantly, just slightly, but enough. A silence stretched so thin it felt like glass about to break. From somewhere outside the glass walls, a faint sound of rain intensified, tapping against the building in uneven rhythm, as if matching the irregularity of the documents in front of them. Annie stepped closer to Benjamin now, her voice smaller but sharper. "That's the same name," she said, pointing to a repeated entry on the bank record. "It appears twice, but one is deleted." Benjamin's eyes narrowed, scanning the line where the deletion had been attempted. Poorly, hurriedly, as if someone had tried to erase a trace but didn't have time to finish. He finally exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled, then looked at the lawyers instead of the paper. "Who had access to this file yesterday after 6 p.m.? he asked. No one answered immediately. Evelyn's lips parted slightly, then closed again, as if the answer she prepared no longer fit the question. Annie, still watching, noticed something else. Evelyn's hand had moved under the table, gripping her phone again, but this time not to silence it. The screen lit briefly before she locked it again, too fast for comfort. Benjamin saw it too. He didn't speak, but he remembered something now. The security footage gap, the duplicated name, the second keycard timestamp, all aligning in a way that did not feel random anymore. Annie looked down at page 7 once more, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not one mistake," she said, and as Benjamin finally unfolded the bank record fully, his eyes landed on a single internal note at the bottom of the transaction. One that matched the erased signature style on the will exactly, as if the same hand had touched both. The moment Benjamin's eyes locked onto the internal note matching the erased signature style, the atmosphere in the room shifted in a way that was almost imperceptible but deeply felt. It wasn't louder, it was colder. Evelyn cross-straightened in her chair first, then closed the bank record folder with a soft, controlled motion, as if sealing it could undo what had already been seen. One of the senior lawyers cleared his throat and stepped forward slightly, placing his palm over the table like an anchor. "Mr. Whitmore," he said carefully, "what you're looking at is an internal reconciliation tag. It's administrative noise. It doesn't affect the validity of the will." His tone was calm, measured, rehearsed, the voice of someone trained to make complexity sound harmless. Behind him, another attorney shifted the documents just a few inches to the left, subtly breaking alignment with Annie's papers, as if spatial order could restore legal order. Annie noticed immediately. She tightened her grip on the folded copy she had brought, her knuckles pale but steady. "It's the same hand," she said quietly. The lawyer turned to her with a soft, almost patronizing smile. "Sweetheart, financial systems reuse formatting markers. That's normal." The word sweetheart lingered in the air longer than intended. Benjamin's gaze flicked toward him, then away, not reacting but recording. The room felt narrower now, the glass walls no longer symbolic openness but containment. Outside the conference room, 2 security personnel appeared at the threshold. Not entering fully, just waiting, positioned with polite professionalism that still communicated authority. Evelyn finally stood. "This is becoming disruptive," she said, her voice smooth but firmer now. She looked directly at Annie, not unkindly, but as one might look at an object misplaced in an important setting. "We can address your concerns through proper channels. Not here." Annie didn't move. She looked up at her, then at Benjamin, then back to the document still open on the table. Proper channels already changed it once, she said. Her voice was small, but it cut cleanly through the polished tone of the room. A silence followed, not dramatic, but tightening, like pressure building behind glass. Benjamin finally spoke, not loudly, but with enough weight that everyone paused mid-breath. "No one touches that file again," he said. The lawyers froze. Evelyn's expression shifted for the first time into something less controlled. Not fear, calculation interrupted. One of the attorneys quickly reached for his tablet, tapping to pull up the official audit log, as if data could resolve the growing instability. "We can verify version integrity right now," he said quickly. The screen lit up. For a moment, everything seemed to hold. Version timestamps, access logs, signature history, all lined up in clean rows. Then Annie stepped closer and pointed at a single line. "That one," she said. "That login doesn't belong to anyone in this room." The attorney frowned, leaning in. Benjamin followed her finger. The login ID on the audit trail showed a system administrator account, one that had been deactivated 6 months earlier. Evelyn's hand moved to her phone again, but this time she hesitated. Before touching it, the hesitation was small, but Benjamin saw it. Outside the glass, rain intensified briefly, tapping faster against the windows, as if reacting to the shift inside. A staff member entered quietly to deliver a sealed courier envelope, placing it near the legal stack without speaking. No one acknowledged it at first. Then Annie looked at it. "That wasn't there before," she said. The courier seal was fresh, too fresh, and the timestamp printed on the corner showed delivery confirmation from exactly 23 minutes earlier, during the period when the security footage had gone dark. Benjamin stared at it for a long moment. Then, without asking anyone, he reached forward and turned the envelope slightly. The return address was partially smudged, but still readable enough to make the room go still in a different way. Evelyn saw it at the same time he did, and for the first time, her voice didn't carry control when she spoke. "That shouldn't exist yet," she said. The courier envelope lay on the table like something that had arrived too early, its edges still crisp, the smudged return address partially obscured by hurried handling. No one touched it at first. The room itself seemed to hesitate, as if acknowledging that whatever was inside did not belong to the version of reality they were trying to maintain. Annie stepped forward before anyone else could intervene. Her small hands pressed the envelope flat, not opening it yet, just anchoring it in place. Benjamin watched her more than the envelope now, as if her certainty mattered more than protocol. Evelyn Cross remained still, but her posture had subtly shifted backward, the way someone leans away from a sound they already recognize but refuse to name. Finally, Benjamin broke the seal himself. Inside was a single printed security digest, thin, official, and timestamped. His eyes moved across it slowly, then stopped. The room did not move with him. It waited for him to react first. Annie tilted her head slightly. "That's from the North Archive server," she said quietly. "The one that was offline for 7 minutes. The attorney nearest to Benjamin exhaled sharply. "That's not possible," he said too, quickly. Benjamin didn't respond. He turned the page again, scanning a highlighted line. Access to legacy will records had been initiated during a blackout window. Exactly 7 minutes unaccounted for in the system logs. Annie's fingers tightened around the folded copy she still carried. "It's the same 7 minutes," she added. The phrase hung in the air without explanation, but Benjamin's expression changed in a way that was almost invisible at first. Just a tightening around the eyes, a pause in breathing that lasted a fraction too long. He set the digest down and looked toward the security monitor in the corner of the room. It was active now, but the timestamp flickered slightly out of sync, as if struggling to reconcile itself. Evelyn finally spoke again, softer this time, controlled but careful. "System maintenance overlaps happen. It's not unusual." But Benjamin didn't look at her. Instead, he reached into the second envelope that had arrived moments earlier and pulled out a small laminated visitor badge. It had a faded company seal and a name printed beneath it, one he had not seen in years, but recognized immediately without needing to read twice. He went still, not visibly dramatic, not outwardly shaken, but something inside his posture locked in place. Annie noticed first. She didn't ask what it meant. She simply watched him stop breathing for a second too long. The lawyers exchanged uncertain glances now, the earlier confidence eroding into something more procedural, more defensive. One of them stepped forward again. "Mr. Whitmore, we should pause and verify." Benjamin raised one hand slightly, stopping him without looking away from the badge. The silence that followed was heavier than before because now it was not confusion. It was recognition forming too slowly to be comfortable. Annie stepped closer and pointed, not at the badge itself, but at the printed clearance level beneath the name. "That access level," she said, "was only given to someone who was inside during the blackout." Evelyn's composure broke just enough to be measurable. She reached for the badge, then stopped mid-motion, withdrawing her hand as if touching it would confirm something. "Irreversible." Benjamin finally spoke, but his voice was quieter than before. "This authorization was supposed to be revoked." No one answered. Outside the glass, the rain slowed for the first time, as if even the storm was waiting. Annie looked up at him. "Then why does it still open the file?" she asked. And Benjamin Whitmore, for the first time since the meeting began, did not look at the documents or the lawyers or the room. He looked at Evelyn Cross and asked one question that made the entire system inside the room feel suddenly unstable. "Where were you during those 7 minutes?" The question hung in the air longer than anyone expected. Not because it was loud, but because it removed every safe explanation left in the room. Evelyn Cross didn't answer immediately. She held Benjamin's gaze for half a second too long, then looked down at the table as if searching for a version of the truth that would still fit inside procedure. "I was in my office," she said finally, voice steady, almost rehearsed, preparing final confirmations for the filing. Benjamin didn't respond. He simply nodded once, slowly, as if accepting the answer not as truth, but as data to be stored and tested later. Annie stood beside him, small in the vastness of glass and polished wood, her hands still holding the folded copy of the older document like it mattered more than anything in the room. "That's not enough," she said quietly. "No acquiescence, just certainty." Outside the conference room, rain pressed harder against the glass for a moment, then softened again, leaving faint streaks that distorted the city beyond like something seen through imperfect memory. Inside, Benjamin finally turned away from Evelyn. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't order anyone out. Instead, he reached for his phone and sent a single message to his private legal auditor. "Pull every system log from the last 30 days, especially anything tied to legacy will access and server downtime." Then he set the phone down face first on the table. No one spoke. The lawyers waited for direction that wasn't coming. Evelyn adjusted her posture again, smoothing invisible fabric at her wrist, the motion too controlled to be natural. Annie watched her closely now, not with fear, but with attention, like she was trying to memorize what dishonesty looked like when it tried to pretend it was calm. "I don't want money," Annie said suddenly. Her voice was small, but it carried cleanly through the room. Benjamin looked at her. She didn't flinch. "I just want my father's name to stop being erased every time someone thinks no one will notice," she continued. "And I want my mom to stop acting like truth is something dangerous." A silence followed, deeper than before, because it didn't belong to legal uncertainty anymore. It belonged to intention. Somewhere behind the walls, a distant television played faintly from a break room, too low to understand the words, just enough to remind everyone that normal life still existed outside this sealed space. In the adjacent kitchenette, a machine beeped softly as someone reheated coffee. The ordinary sounds made the tension sharper, not softer, like reality refusing to acknowledge what was unfolding. Benjamin stood slowly and walked to the glass wall overlooking the city. He didn't look at the view. He looked at reflections, at the room behind him, at Evelyn, at the lawyers, at Annie. Then he spoke without turning. "Get me access history from the internal archive node," he said to no one in particular, but everyone understood it was not a suggestion. One of the attorneys hesitated. "Sir, that level of access requires—" "Do it," Benjamin said quietly. Not louder, just final. The attorney stopped speaking and reached for his laptop. Annie moved closer to Benjamin's side, her presence steadying rather than interrupting. Evelyn finally spoke again, softer now, careful. Benjamin, this is becoming disproportionate. You're reacting to a child's interpretation of technical anomalies. No, he interrupted, still not turning. I'm reacting to 7 minutes that shouldn't exist. The words landed differently now. Not emotional, structural. Benjamin returned to the table and opened his phone again. A new notification had arrived from his auditor, preliminary log extraction. His eyes scanned it once, then again more slowly. A single line stood out, administrative. Override initiated using legacy credential authentication. The credential tag matched the badge Annie had pointed out earlier. And the access origin was not the server room. It was his own executive floor. For a moment, Benjamin didn't move. The room didn't either. Even the rain outside seemed to hesitate. He looked up slowly, not at Annie this time but past her, toward Evelyn Cross. And in that quiet shift of attention, something irreversible formed in his expression. Not anger, not shock, but the recognition that for months, maybe longer, he had been trusting the wrong person to stand closest to the truth without ever questioning what they chose to stand between. Benjamin didn't move when he saw the final line in the log. He simply read it again, slower this time, as if repetition could either confirm or undo reality. The executive floor access tag, the legacy credential, the exact 7-minute window, and Evelyn Cross's name, subtly embedded in a system path that should never have routed through administrative override. Annie stood beside him, silent now, watching his face instead of the screen. She wasn't celebrating. She was waiting. Benjamin closed the laptop gently, too gently for someone who had just found a fracture inside his own system. "Don't announce anything yet," he said finally. His voice was calm, but the kind of calm that comes after a line has already been crossed internally. He turned slightly toward Annie. "I need confirmation, not interpretation." Annie nodded once. "Then ask her about the second login," she said. Benjamin's eyes shifted. "What second login?" Annie pointed not to the screen but to the table. "The one at 10:15. The one that doesn't match her voice." That detail landed heavier than the rest. Not because it was complex, but because it was simple enough that only someone paying attention would notice it. Benjamin didn't ask how she knew. He simply absorbed it. Then he looked toward Evelyn Cross, who had not moved from her seat, but whose stillness now felt deliberate rather than composed. "Evelyn," Benjamin said quietly, "did you access the archive node at 10:15 this morning?" A soft laugh escaped one of the attorneys, immediate and nervous. "That's not, sir, that would be impossible without." Benjamin raised his hand slightly. The attorney stopped. Evelyn adjusted her posture, fingers interlacing on the table. "No," she said smoothly. "I was in my office the entire time." Annie tilted her head slightly at that answer, not reacting emotionally, just listening to the shape of it. "That's not what the door log says," she whispered. Evelyn's eyes flicked toward her for the first time with something sharper beneath the politeness. Benjamin noticed the flicker. He said nothing. Instead, he reached for the tablet again and projected the entry log onto the glass wall. The room's reflection fractured across the city skyline behind it. A list of entries appeared. One line stood out. Executive override initiated at 10:15. Authentication via secondary credential channel. Evelyn Cross. No one spoke. A faint vibration echoed across the table. A phone left face down. Someone's notification repeating but ignored. Outside, a delivery cart rolled past the building entrance, its wheels briefly audible through the glass before fading again. The ordinary world continuing, unaware of the quiet collapse happening behind reinforced walls. Evelyn finally stood. Slowly, carefully. "That system is known to generate sync errors during archival migration," she said, her voice steady again, but less warm. "We're talking about metadata lag, not intent." Benjamin looked at her for a long moment. Not angry, not reactive, just observant in a way that made the room feel suddenly smaller. "Then replicate it," he said. The request was simple. Too simple. Evelyn blinked once. What? Annie stepped forward slightly, just enough to be seen fully. Do it again, she said softly. Log in. Show us the same path. A silence followed, not dramatic but procedural. One of the lawyers shifted his laptop closer to Evelyn, as if offering an exit route without naming it. She didn't take it immediately. Instead, her hand hovered over the keyboard for a fraction too long. That hesitation was enough. Benjamin noticed it. Annie noticed it. Even the attorney noticed it and looked away too quickly. If there's nothing wrong, Benjamin said quietly, it should be easy. Evelyn finally placed her fingers on the keyboard. The room's air conditioning clicked again, slightly louder than before. Progress will appeared on the screen. Loading credentials. Annie watched the screen instead of Evelyn. It's the wrong time, she said suddenly. Everyone turned slightly toward her. The system doesn't respond like that at 10:15, she added. It responds faster. That's delayed. Evelyn's hand paused mid-motion again, just for a moment, but Benjamin had already seen it. Not the hesitation itself, but what it meant. He leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing not at the screen, but at Evelyn Cross as the loading wheel continued spinning longer than it should have, and for the first time since this began, he stopped wondering if she might be mistaken and started calculating how long she had been prepared for someone else to eventually notice. The loading wheel on the screen stopped. For a fraction of a second, nothing changed, and then the system didn't reject the request, it expanded it. A hidden recovery window unfolded across the glass wall projection, as if the building itself had been storing a version of the truth it never intended to show. Annie stepped closer instinctively, her small hand tightening around the folded copy of page 7, as the interface resolved into a layered archive labeled Legacy Override Session, 10:15 a.m. Benjamin didn't speak. He didn't blink. Evelyn Cross, however, took a single step forward, too slow to be casual, too controlled to be accidental. The room's air shifted again, but this time no one tried to explain it. The file opened, not as text, as audio. First came the sound of the server room door unlocking, then footsteps, then Evelyn's voice, unmistakable now, stripped of polish and distance. Initiate archival rewrite. Remove reference line from page 7. A second voice responded, technical, uncertain. That requires executive clearance confirmation. A pause. Then Evelyn again, closer to the microphone this time. Override using secondary credential. Benjamin's hand slowly left the edge of the table. Not dramatically, just enough to show he had stopped pretending this was still theory. Annie didn't move her eyes from the projection. That's the sound, she whispered. That's the same time the screen went dark. The recording continued. A soft mechanical beep. File access confirmed. Then another layer opened, video. Grainy, time-stamped footage from the executive archive corridor. Evelyn standing alone in front of a secure terminal. No lawyers. No staff. Just her, the screen, and a document marked Legacy will master copy. She typed without hesitation. The page 7 line highlighted itself automatically as if recognizing her access. Benjamin exhaled once, slowly, but did not speak. Evelyn in the room now turned toward the screen, her face tightening. This is not complete context, she said quickly. Her voice was no longer controlled, it was managed. This system aggregates partial logs without authorization layers. The recording cut forward. Another timestamp. Same corridor. Same terminal. But now the file showed the deletion event in full clarity. The original beneficiary line appearing, then dissolving under a manual override. Annie stepped forward half a step. That's him, she said suddenly. That's my father's name. No one corrected her, because no one could. The system had already confirmed it. The name existed, then was removed, then replaced with a blank authorization marker tied directly to Evelyn Cross's credential chain. Benjamin finally moved. He walked toward the projection, stopping inches from the glass reflection of the footage. In the video, Evelyn turned slightly as if someone had entered off camera. A second figure appeared briefly, one of the attorneys, standing just outside the terminal's light. Enough to confirm coordination, not enough to claim ignorance. The room behind Benjamin was silent in a way that no longer felt procedural. Felt collapsed inward. Annie's voice broke it, but only barely. "They didn't lose my father's name," she said. "They removed it." Evelyn turned sharply toward her. "You don't understand what you're seeing," she said. But the sentence carried less authority than before. Benjamin raised a hand. Not toward Annie, not toward Evelyn, but toward the projection. "Stop," he said. Quietly. The recording froze. The final frame held. Page 7 on screen. A name half visible beneath a correction line that should never have been editable. Benjamin stared at it for a long time. Something in his expression shifted. Not anger, not disbelief, but recognition of responsibility delayed too long. He slowly reached into his pocket, placed his glasses on the table without looking away from Evelyn, and spoke in a voice so calm it made the room colder than any accusation could. "Call my attorney." The silence that followed Benjamin's order didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning that no one in the room was prepared to survive intact. His attorney's line connected within seconds, but Benjamin didn't speak immediately. He kept his eyes on the frozen projection of page 7, where the erased name still faintly resisted the deletion that had tried to erase it. Evelyn Cross stood perfectly still now, no longer adjusting her posture, no longer attempting explanation. The version of control she had carried into the room was gone, replaced by something quieter and heavier. Exposure. Annie didn't move from Benjamin's side. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't celebrating. She was simply watching the space where truth had finally stopped being theoretical. Benjamin finally spoke into the phone. "Initiate immediate audit lockdown of all archival access tied to legacy will systems. Freeze every credential linked to Evelyn Cross." His voice remained even, but it carried a finality that no one in the room could mistake for negotiation. A pause. Then his attorney's response came through, sharp and professional. "Understood. Do you want me to notify regulatory compliance?" Benjamin glanced once at Annie before answering. "Yes, and prepare legal submission for document falsification and unauthorized system override." The words didn't echo. They settled. Evelyn exhaled slowly, as if trying to hold on to something internal that was already slipping past containment. "Benjamin," she said quietly, "this is going to escalate beyond proportion. You're acting on incomplete context." For the first time, he turned fully toward her. Not quickly, not angrily, just completely. "No," he said. "I've been acting on incomplete context for months." The room shifted again, not physically but socially. The lawyers no longer looked at Evelyn when she spoke. They looked at the table, at the screen, at anything that wasn't attached to certainty. Annie stepped forward slightly, her voice softer now, but clear enough to carry through the collapse of professional distance. "You didn't just erase a name," she said. "You erased a life that still had people waiting for it." No one corrected her, because no one could. Benjamin motioned toward the attorney. "Pull the full beneficiary reconstruction file," he said. "I want every revision layer, every hidden overwrite, every access point tied to that deletion." Outside the glass walls, the rain finally stopped. The silence that followed felt larger than the storm that had caused it. Minutes later, a second projection filled the glass wall. Not fragmented this time, complete. The original structure of the will appeared, restored through archival recovery. And there it was again, her father's name, intact in its original position, marked as rightful beneficiary before the deletion event. Evelyn closed her eyes for the first time, not in defeat, in recognition that the sequence could no longer be reversed. Benjamin looked at it for a long time, then slowly stepped back from the table. "Suspend all distributions tied to this file," he said into the phone. "Effective immediately." A brief confirmation came through. The system was no longer theoretical, it was active correction. Evelyn's voice lowered, almost disappearing now. "You're dismantling years of structure based on a single corrupted archive chain." Benjamin didn't respond to that. Instead, he looked at Annie. Really looked at her. "You didn't guess this," he said quietly. Annie shook her head once. No, she said. I just read what was left when everyone else stopped looking. Something in Benjamin's expression softened. Not into sentiment, but into clarity. He turned slightly toward the room. Effective immediately, he said. Evelyn Cross is removed from all fiduciary authority pending full legal review. No reaction followed from the room. Except stillness. Not shock. Not protest. Just the settling of consequence. Evelyn didn't argue. She simply reached down, picked up her phone, and placed it on the table as if returning something that no longer belonged to her. Annie exhaled slowly, the first time her posture had loosened since she walked into the room. Benjamin took off his jacket and placed it gently over her shoulders without saying anything. She didn't resist. In the quiet that followed, a staff member quietly entered with a revised legal summary, placing it at the edge of the table like something newly safe. Benjamin signed the first authorization page without hesitation. Then he looked at Annie again and said nothing for a long moment before finally adding in a lower voice. From this point forward, your father's name is no longer a question in this system. It is a record. Annie looked down at the document, then back at him. That's all I needed, she said. The room didn't move after that. It simply held the silence of something that had finally been corrected at its root, while outside, the building lights stayed on a little longer than usual, as if refusing to let the night claim what had just been restored.